So, Brad, you know how I've said in the past how, for the most part, I don't care about like Hollywood premieres and all that sort of stuff. So my wife's always like, hey, do you want to go to blankety blank with me? And I'm like, not really. But there was one coming up that I really wanted to go to, and my wife moved like heaven and earth in her schedule because she is in production. She had a call time at 4 a.m. the next morning and actively had to leave a shoot that night. And she took me to the Rings of Power premiere for Lord of the Rings thing.
Yes, I've been hearing about this.
Oh, Brad, I got to tell you, they dropped some cash at this premiere. So this is the most expensive television show ever made. It's $1 billion.
Wow, $1 billion.
A good chunk of which is just the licensing fee. But anyway, so I got to tell you, because you will appreciate this, though. There's all these stars around. Jeff Bezos is 3 rows back for me. Simon Tolkien is 2 rows back for me, the grandson of Tolkien. You know, he's now, I guess he's the head of the estate, I think. And the only thing I cared about before the show started, Brad, they were giving out free boxes of M&Ms. Not like small little bags. Boxes of M&Ms.
A box.
And Brad, all these stars, they're dressed to the nines. They don't want M&Ms. You know who did want M&Ms? The cartoonist came in the suit that he was barely fitting in. Oh, that guy was happy to go back for 7s on the boxes of M&Ms. Brad, happy as a clam. Happy as a clam.
You 7 boxes? Were you putting them in your pockets like that old Italian grandmother at the wedding, just stuffing them into the purse?
Brad, you know you are in love when your wife is like, go ahead, put him in my purse. Go ahead, put him in your purse. Put him in my purse. Go ahead. Just like, it's like resigned to that it's going to happen. Like, yes, okay, fine. Put him in. Yes, I have stuff in there that I need, but you go ahead and get your free M&Ms.
Yes.
I kept saying, Brad, they're for the kids. They're for the kids. She's like, those are not for the kids.
The kids would love those. It's so funny that you mentioned that, because the one year I was nominated for an Eisner, I got to sit in the big room for the ceremony, and they were giving out little bags of specially done, they had them special printed up, Eisner M&Ms. And I swear to God, I've still got them in the studio. I couldn't bring myself to eat them because they were Eisner M&Ms. I've got them. If you look behind me on the bookshelf, I've got a Godzilla toy at the very top, and he's holding the Eisner M&Ms that I got in 2007. I almost feel like I want to dare myself to try to eat one at this point, just to see if I survive the experience.
No, I got to tell you, Brad, we've both been nominated for the Eisner, but I think those M&Ms are the closest we're ever going to get. I think you might want to hold on to those, and we're not going to get the statuette, but by God, you got the 10-year-old. You got the 10-year-old M&Ms. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is brought to you by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We have a flurry of questions and a topic that Brad and I are dying to get into at the top of the show here. Yeah. But I just want to remind everybody that you can be joining us live right now over at patreon.com/comiclab. The Live Gab group, it joins us every week for the live stream of the show. And there is a concurrent chat along the side, and they are chatting away right now. And the show is archived every week. So in case you miss it for Life, Love, or Learning, you can watch it on the archive. And Bradley J., we got a big topic to start off the show this week. Big.
Yeah, it's a huge one. And it's something that I was saying in the pre-show, we've been talking about between ourselves for years. And it's kind of a driving factor in how we approach our business and our cartooning for the last 20 years. It's a fear that we both have. And it's the fear of turning into our heroes.
Oh, terrified of it. Terrified of turning. And the reason why we structure that is intentional, because everyone thinks that you want to grow up to be your heroes. Yeah. You as a child, as a young adult, as a young cartoonist, you're like, I want to be my hero. Oh boy, look at me. I'm becoming my hero. And we have, for now, probably going on 15 years, been talking about how we don't want to turn into our hero. We're terrified of it. Terrified of turning into our heroes. And it's become, like Brad said, it's a formative idea in our careers, because do you remember in the movie Inside Out where certain core memories make like a baseline of someone's personality, right? So there's family, there's friendship, there's this or that. This idea of being terrified of turning into our heroes is, I think, a core memory for Brad and I that we've carried now through 15, 20 years of being cartoonists online. And Brad, what's the basic idea for this for us?
Well, for us, you have to remember that for us, this is particularly egregious because our heroes didn't want us around. Okay. And there was a wonderful documentary out there called Stripped that was co-created by my friend Dave Kellett and my other friend Fred Schroeder. But go and watch that documentary. It talks about this period of time in the early 2000s when the internet was cresting and syndicated cartoonists saw people like Dave and I and a whole bunch of other people bringing our comics to people directly using the internet, not using a syndicate, not using a publisher. And there was a lot of friction there. They saw us as tearing down the buildings that they had helped build and were living in. And we just saw ourselves as saying, hey, we don't need any of that anymore. We can do it this way, and it's just as valid as any other way. And we remind people from time to time, in the early days, the NCS, the National Cartoonist Society, would not accept the membership of a professional web cartoonist. They had to prove that they were getting their money through comics, and to them, that meant a syndicate or a publisher. So for us, our heroes and us, we had a very contentious relationship, and it was a lot of it's hard to explain to somebody who's under 40 or maybe even at this point under 30 the print versus web flame wars that would happen online, the really vicious arguments that at this point amounts to absolutely nothing. Nobody cares anymore. It's all the same thing. But our heroes didn't want us around at all. And at the same time, they were these people that as young children, Dave and I both looked up to. Some of them, the very people that we were arguing with, were the very same people whose work that we had idolized. So for us, it's a very special thing to not turn into our heroes.
Yeah. And so with that as a background, here's the fundamental idea of why we're terrified of turning into our heroes is because everyone that we lionized or idolized when we were kids, we have since in our adult years seen that they are either intractable or incapable of staying nimble and changing and switching up their business model. And despite warnings 10 years ago that like, hey, you need to dip a toe into XYZ, they didn't do it. And then now that things are truly falling apart on the newspaper scene, and they are, they're coming to us. I get an email. I don't know, Brad, what do you think? Every 2 months or so, I get an email like, hey, describe for me your business model again. And I'm like, I told you 3 times at presentations at the NCS weekends and you wouldn't listen. I mean, there was an 80-year-old Brad. I don't want to name names because he's passed on. I don't make fun of the dead, but he literally stood up and laughed during my speech about like how online people make a living. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm done. I tried 3 NCS weekends in a row. I tried to make presentations on how you build a career online. They didn't want to hear it. And now that it's truly falling apart, it's kind of like what's that old wives' tale? Not the wives' tale, but the parable of the grasshopper. And what's the other bug? The
grasshopper and the ant.
Yeah. The ant like actually prepared, and the grasshopper is like, no, the syndication money's still pretty good.
And it ain't so good anymore. And I remember that story of the guy standing up and laughing at you, and it makes me mad even to this day. But those were the people who were really, even then, even in the year 2000, 2001, it was impossible for them to change how they were doing what they were doing, how they were approaching it. Even for them to think about it, it was impossible. Now, in the year 2022, 20 years later, it's I don't want to say it's too late for them, but as we've seen, one of the common threads in our conversation about Substack is that one of the things that we were using as a predictor for some of these folks is whether they were able to switch from a publisher mindset to a entrepreneur mindset. And that's what you really have to do to make something like Substack work. They had to become entrepreneurs. And that was one of the things we were saying when we had our day 366. Right? 366?
Yep.
I said 380 before. I still can't believe it. But anyway, that's one of the ways that we used for deciding that. Right. And so Dave and I, since day one of webcomics, were terrified of getting to the point that we couldn't change, that we couldn't take a look at. And by the way, we've lived through 2, if not 3 major upheavals in the way we do business, going from the ad-supported business model to a crowdfunding supported business model was probably one of the biggest. But also the shift from what's the opposite of homogenized? Distributed websites.
Heterogeneous? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. It's from distributed websites to a homogenized kind of social media publishing.
Right.
That was another one that we've lived through. And there are more to come. And we're terrified of getting caught. Also, let's just go right and throw for the third one, vertical scroll that we've been talking about a lot. Big change in how people are reading our stuff.
Big change,
we're terrified of being caught flat-footed and not being able to adapt.
Yeah, it is my greatest fear actually about my career is that I somehow get comfortable.
Yeah.
Because I saw that happen with my heroes. They got comfortable and they stopped keeping their head on a swivel, stopped paying attention to what cartoonists 10, 15, 20 years younger than them were doing. Yeah. And so even right now, at this very moment, I'm like, oh crap, what are these 20-year-old cartoonists doing on webtoons that I have not figured out yet? How are these certain cartoonists have figured out Instagram and using video? Is that something that I have to do, even though I don't want to do video? So I'm constantly asked these questions because I don't want to be the 65-year-old cartoonist going, show me how you do this. I don't, I know we're going to have that moment in our lives. I know this, where we have to turn to our kids and our grandkids to explain the technology of the day in the same way that we have to have them explain the slang of today, right? Brad, that is no cap. I'm telling you that you got to have people explain the slang to you.
Bet. Listen, bet. That means I agree. Bet.
Really? That one I didn't know. I didn't know. Well, I'm going to tell you, that's a sleigh, Your Honor. That's a sleigh right there. That's just some new slang that I did not know.
It also becomes not only get caught flat-footed, but it becomes also, there's another part of that, and it's becoming obstinate. In other words, I can see, and we're seeing a lot of this.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I see this on social media all the time when we talk about the vertical scroll. I've seen, not directly to me, but I see people talking about it, right? And they're like, well, the vertical scroll is bad because this, and the vertical scroll is bad because that. And they're grasping for things to try to reinforce their points on why the vertical scroll is no good. And really what it comes down to is I don't like it. I just don't like it. And so therefore, I'm not going to do about it. And it's kind of, you kind of hear them saying, this is the hill that I'm going to die on. I'm going to die on this hill. There's only one problem with that kind of attitude. You end up dead.
I'm going to die on this hill. You know what, Brad? This is jumping gears. I'm not done talking about not wanting to be our heroes, but I want to talk real quick about the vertical scroll because you and I in conversation the other day, and we're talking about vertical scroll and some people's hesitation about it. And I had an insight that I think is actually really helpful, which is getting used to the vertical scroll for all of us who grew up with horizontally oriented comics is a little bit like changing a language. And for me specifically, since Spanish was my second language, the vertical scroll is like this. Do you remember how when you're first learning Spanish, the upside down question mark and upside down exclamation point at the beginning of a sentence, you're like, what the hell is this? Why would you do this? This is weird. And then as you get better and better in Spanish, you're like, this is brilliant. This is language construction at its best. It's forecasting the mood that you're going to be tackling this sentence with. It lets you know ahead of time. This is a better construction of language. This is actually better than English, the way this is done. And then you go, why doesn't English do this? And so that's kind of how I feel about vertical scroll. My first reaction was, this is stupid. Why are we doing it this way? Comics are meant to be horizontal. And then you see, actually, no, wait a minute. There's actually really good benefits to doing it vertically, and you embrace it, right? You start to come around on it. And so in conversation the other day, I just found that to be a helpful insight that it is a little bit like just breaking out of the obstinacy of the new, where you're like, I don't want this. I don't like this. This is different. And therefore it is bad. Very often just getting past that point, you'll be like, oh, actually, no, there's a lot of validity to the way this is structured.
Yeah. And so that brings me to my question, Dave Kellett. Now that I've mentioned hills and dying, is there a hill that you're worried about dying on? Or is there a hill? You know what I mean? Is there something coming up that you're worried you're just not going to be able to swing with?
Can I tell you the fear, not the fear, I don't know how to describe this, but here's how I think I could get really tripped up. So our careers came about with the reverse of consolidation. So all of the traditional systems were breaking apart and everything got atomized. And so a lot of individual independent careers got started online that you could own and control your own business. And that was the way to do it, right? And so in the years since, we have figured out T-shirts, we have figured out books, we figured out magnets and prints, and we figured out Patreon, we figured out Kickstarter, we figured out ads, we figured out all that stuff one by one because we were in control of our business. But the thing that I do fear that is a hill that I might accidentally die on is not seeing in far enough advance that the industry has reconsolidated under 2 or 3 umbrellas and I miss the boat. And I'm a little bit afraid that that's what might happen with webtoons if I'm not careful, because I'm just being honest here. The people do not use the web or RSS or email in the same way that they did 10 years ago. And people, younger teens and 20s, seem to be finding their comics through webtoons or Tapas or Tapastic or whatever, whatever have you, that kind of a service again. And I don't want to be caught flat-footed under reconsolidation.
I'll tell you the hill that I'm scared that I might just end up dying on. And see, yours is being caught flat-footed, like not seeing the bullet as it's coming. Mine is the obstinate one. Because I try as I might, I don't think I can swing with this that I see on the horizon, and it might end up being the hill that I die on, and I might end up being dead on a hill as a result. It's artificial intelligence art and artificial intelligence writing. And there's been a lot of talk about it. If you go to the ComicLab Discord server, there's a lot of talk about it right now. And I'm going to be honest with you. Take especially the AI art where, there are some copyright concerns. There's some intellectual property concerns in that this stuff isn't coming from nowhere. No, it's coming from somewhere.
The only way AI can create is to have a feeder source. Absolutely.
And there are some unmistakable moral choices, in my opinion, to be made there. But even beyond that, the whole idea of AI art and AI writing is I can go right along with everything. You've heard me talk about any number of things using photo reference. We've talked about. We've talked about using 3D models in CSP. We've talked about a lot of stuff. I can swing with all of it. I'm a big fan of it. Using artificial intelligence might end up being my hill. And it's not that I don't see it's coming. I don't think I can swing with it.
Yeah. So I would like to propose to you that we put not a pin in this, but because I do want to talk about this right now, but I think in the future, let's take a couple weeks and think about this and do a whole show about AI art, because I agree with you that this could become one of the biggest stories in all of art creation. And it's the same for those of us that lived through automation in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. First it was like, oh, well, manufacturing jobs, a robot can't build a car. And then you figured out, well, a robot can build like 60% of a car. And that's an awful lot of jobs it could get rid of. Right. And then you're like, well, we're always going to need secretaries. You can't get rid of a secretary pool. And then you're like, no, word processing is pretty good. And now you can get rid of all the secretaries, And so all the jobs that you thought were permanent, even the kind of thing of like local lawyer that does wills. It's like, well, no, now we got software that can modify to most of the 50 states. And this big company can sell you a will or sell you an estate trust or something. That's pretty good. It's 80% there if you want it, like for $50. So what I'm getting at is a lot of industries were like, well, our industry can't be impacted by automation or in this case, artificial intelligence. We're fine. There's no way you could replace an artist. I'm increasingly thinking you could replace an artist with AI.
I so disagree. I disagree vehemently.
And yet you're afraid of being caught flat-footed on it, though.
Oh no, I'm not flat-footed at all. I'm obstinate. I'm the other one. I put my foot down. Creation, the whole act of creation.
Okay.
I see all of this stuff on AI art, which is, oh look, I got an image. Yeah, you got an image. Did you get the right image? Is it a good image? Is
no. I agree with you. What here's well, you know what? Shit. I was going to put it off for a couple weeks. Let's talk about it this week. Who cares? This is fun. So here is my take on AI art making is that what's going to happen, Brad, is that in the same way that Taco Bell is not real food, but it gets you past the afternoon hunger pains for $2, you know?
Yeah.
AI art is not true art, but there will be a lot of situations where a local company just needs advertising or, a car dealership just needs a little bit of pop to put on their poster or whatever. And they're going to use AI art because it's cheaper than hiring a human, even at a Fiverr, rate, that kind of thing. So I think much like automation in factories where a robot can't build the whole car, but a robot could build 40 to 60% of the car, you're going to have a lot of uses for AI art where Brad Guigar can't figure out how to do the layout for this page, but you're going to turn on your AI and your Adobe platform and you're going to say, give me 40 different layouts that I could do this page where panel 2 is the biggest, layout and it's got a splash feel to it. And then Adobe AI will spit out 40 pages for you real quick and you'll go, oh, that one's pretty good. I'll do that one. And so then you'll iterate on it, but you used AI as a tool in the process. That's what I think is going to happen with AI.
I know. And I hate everything about what you just said.
I know, but think about it though. It's no different than Vermeer using a visual machine to try to capture the world with painting.
I know. I logically I know that, and I see people. Let's go over to AI writing, and they're like, somebody pointed out on the Discord server, right? This computer wrote a joke, and it's a good joke. And people are like, yeah, maybe I'll use that for my writing. And I'm sitting there pulling my hair out, saying. Because if here's the thing that I'm worried about, here's my worry that I'll share with you, especially and I'm on my journey as a writer. I'm not like the perfect writer that I'm saying I'm sitting on top of the hill here. But if to a person who's trying to learn to become a better writer, who looks at this as a tool to help them get better. Right. It's the same way as somebody in school trying to convince me that if I do their algebra homework for them, they're going to learn math. Well, no, I just did your homework for you. You've got the finished homework, but you can't do math. And I get really scared when I hear people about using this as a writing tool because you're not learning about writing.
Well, this is where I will differ with you. And there is an argument to be made of like, well, is there a soul in the machine that can truly create? Yeah. And I would argue that one of the reasons why I'm a little bit anxious about AI art making is that sheer brute force can actually be really close to mimicry of soul in the machine. So if you put in the complete works of Shakespeare, Tennyson, Milton, Hitchcock, you put in literally hundreds of thousands of artists into a cloud system that a computer can access, right? Mm-hmm. And you tell it to synthesize all of those 1 million samples, you'll get something that feels like genuine creativity, even though it is not creativity. We know that it's iterative of all the input that's been put into it. You know what I mean? Like, because there's so many inputs that the sheer synthesis of all those will feel like creativity to us, Yeah. Because the hero's journey, there's only really a couple hundred different ways you can do the hero's journey. And so if you plug in the complete works of Shakespeare, of Tennyson, of Milton, of Alfred Hitchcock, of, all these different filmmakers, you're going to get, and then say, but base it all in a colony of birds. And you'll get a whole wonderful kids movie on a hero's journey based on birds that synthesizes a bunch of stuff from, artists from history.
Yeah, I know.
Like sheer brute computing force will make that feel creative, even though it's iterative, is what I'm saying.
I know. I totally get everything you said, and again, this is where my obstinance comes in. I hate every word you just said. Oh
no, don't get me wrong. I hate it. I hate the idea that we could be replaced on some level in the same way that chefs are somewhat replaced by Taco Bell for cheap, easy, quick, quote unquote food. There's going to be cheap, easy, quick, quote unquote, comics that AI makes for like, employee instruction manuals or a train station in Tokyo. And they didn't want to pay for an artist, so they just had an AI do it, because all you need is a stick figure to show, don't go through this door if the signs are blaring, And so the Tokyo train system hires this AI system. It produces a little comic for them. No human was involved. Bada bing, bada boom. That's going to happen. That is 100% going to happen.
I'm scared of AI art and writing probably exactly the same way that syndicated cartoonists were scared of us.
Oh, interesting. Okay, expand on that. And there's expand on that.
There's a real parallel there. They took a look at us as being not official, not valid.
Right.
It was a cheapening of the art form because in their day, only certain people could be syndicated cartoonists.
The gates were kept,
and all of a sudden, everybody could be a cartoonist, right?
Right.
There was a lack of the specialness, the lack of the validation.
Yes, the lack of.
I am, when you talk about being scared of turning into your heroes, I feel my arteries hardening at the moment. I feel it. I feel the congealing of everything that I hold dear. I feel the same fear that I think they felt, and in the same way that they were not gonna change. I'm scared. Well, no, I'll tell you. What am I gonna fool you? You've been listening to the show for the last 26 minutes. I ain't gonna change.
You will. You know why? Because the mere act of doing this show and the weekly conversations that you and I have, we keep our heads on a swivel.
Yeah.
And we will, God, I hope this is my fear coming through together and with the community. I'm not kidding about this. I have to pump myself up because what else can you do? Yeah. If we stay involved in the community and we keep doing shows and we're involved in forums and we're talking to each other and we're doing a weekly podcast, there's no way that we can't see major trends coming. In the same way that, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, no, more than that, Kevin McShane, our friend over at BuzzFeed, was like, Dave, mobile computing is taking over the Asian market. Yes. You have to switch your desktop to a mobile system. And I was like, but he was right. And had I been paying attention, had I kept my head on a swivel, I would have adapted my website long ago, as you did. So what I'm saying is, we'll see it coming, Brad. We'll see it coming. It's just a matter of, can we force one another to make the changes and adapt as it comes? And that's what I'm terrified of. I am terrified of that.
Yeah, I think our hill is coming. The only question that's going to be left up to us is, are we going to die on it?
Well, let me ask you kind of a broad question, because I'm sort of curious to see what your reaction to this will be. What will be the end of your career?
What do you mean?
Okay, you're not dead. You still have 10 more years of work to do in your heart.
Yeah.
But what could it be that could end your career?
Well, I mean, I might not understand what you're getting at, so I'm just going to give you what my first. This comes out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Answer,
okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's my answer. The end of my career is nobody's interested in what I'm doing anymore, and I've got to find something else to do. That's the end of my career. I'm putting comics out, nobody's reading them. I'm putting books out, nobody's buying them. My crowdfunding is down to zero. It's time to face facts. Nobody's looking for Brad Guigar no more, and it's time for him to find something else to do. That's the end of my career.
Oh, God. It's too real. All right, you got too real.
I mean, was there supposed to be another answer?
No, I mean, in a way, that was the best answer, because here's where I was getting at, and I think you actually answered it in the perfect way, because provided people are still reading you, provided they still want your books, provided they're still willing to support you creating those things, you'll figure out a way to make that work. It may not be Patreon. It might not even exist 10 years from now. It may not be Kickstarter. That might not even exist from now. It might not be books anymore, because the physical act of printing books, who knows, maybe we'll reach a certain level of drought where they'll be like, no more tree cutting, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so maybe books will be off the table. What I'm getting at is, if you still have a willing audience, though, Brad, I know, or at the very least, gosh, I hope that you'll be able to pivot enough to make it work.
We're gonna, you and I, as we enter our golden ages, our golden years, you and I are going to be living out, and the rest of us listening to this podcast, by the way, you're in this together with us. We're going to be living out a real world scenario of John Henry. Remember the old fable of John Henry? Who he was a steel driving man, and they put him up against a machine, and his whole thing was he was trying to prove that a man can work as much as a machine. You don't remember? Yeah, I'm getting a blank stare.
No, I do remember John Henry. He did it, but then he dropped dead. Is that what you're saying? We're about to drop dead? Great. All right, thanks. Thanks for the parable of John Henry, Brad. I'm going to drive my steel in and then drop dead. Good job.
Yeah. I think this next phase of our lives is going to be proving a John Henry axiom. Not only that it's not going to be is AI good enough? It's going to be, can we keep up with AI?
Did you ever see the movie? I think it was either She or Her. I forget what the title was, where the guy falls in love with the AI.
I did not see it, but I'm familiar with it.
So I just want to talk about one brief thing, because it's an interesting idea. In a world of ever increasing automation, where every phone line you call is an AI to answer for your car dealership, or for every business that you interact with, it's actually not a human, it's an AI you're emailing with. For every, your business planner is now an AI. It's no longer a human. Your lawyer is an AI thing producing documents for you. It's no longer human. In a world like that, which is very possible 15, 20 years from now, in a world like that, I could actually see it where art remains one of the few things where people are like, you know what? I would like a human touch. I would like this to be created by a human, because there's a whole business in, I forget the title, it's either She or Her, where he basically creates handwritten, human written notes, not AI written notes for other humans. And so I can see that the artifice might be one of the last things to go for humanity with automation, where they're like, no, I would still like this to be from human hands, the craft involved.
And when you say that, I am immediately taken back to 1995, standing in the newsroom of the repository in Canton, Ohio. It might have been later than 95, but go with me. As an editor looked me in the eye and said, forget about this internet stuff. People are always going to want to hold a newspaper in their hand.
Damn you. Damn you, Brad. I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
And also, they were so, and I saw it in editor after editor, newspaper after newspaper. They all told me the same thing. They're always going to want to hold that newspaper in their hand.
God damn it. I mean, what immediately dated that story in terms of like, well, you knew they were doomed, is that the title of the newspaper was called The Repository. That's like trying to keep a car business alive that's called Oldsmobile. I'm like, there's a reason why GM had to get rid of it. It's like, you want to try the new car from Oldsmobile? You're like, what the hell? Yeah. What is this marketing? The Repository. I mean, yes, you're right, Brad. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I'd love to be swaddled and cuddled into those words that you just said about people are always going to want the human touch in art, as you're saying that, I'm hearing that editors saying they're always going to want to hold a newspaper in their hand.
Well, if you remember, in the same comparison of like why Taco Bell exists, even though it's not quote unquote food, I think that kind of art will 1,000% replace us. When people need cheap, quick, easy art that they don't want to pay for a human, they're going to hire an AI company to spit something out for $50.
But nobody gets asked to work for free as much as artists. Everything that artists do, they consider to be
so
quick,
imagine a company that comes along and goes, all right, yes, I'll do it for damn near free. $20. It's no processing time, and I'll spit out an image for you.
And it's the same thing that was the doom of the photographers, because I remember talking to speaking of my days in newspapers. That's what killed photographers, is because they could go and shoot a news story, and they did it in a wonderful professional way. And when the iPhone came around, they just handed an iPhone to a reporter and said, "Hey, while you're there, get a few snapshots of the news event." And the editors, the people in decision-making capabilities, could not discern a quality difference between the professionally shot photojournalism and a snapshot that the reporter, you could, if you knew visuals, you could see a world of difference between the two.
Sure.
But for the editors, here was a photo. We got a photo. We need a photo to run with the story. Now we got a photo. It's got the guy's face. It's in focus. Done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the hill that we're going to end up dying on.
Oh my God, you were really broken right there.
I really am. I feel like John Henry.
Microphone. You're like, oh, that's the hill we're gonna die on.
Yeah. I feel like John Henry. I'm up against a drill that's just going to keep on drilling and drilling and drilling, and sooner or later I'm going to get tired and fall over.
I did not expect at the beginning of this conversation to see that the end result of us being terrified to become our heroes was because the android from Aliens was the one that's going to replace us. And
not only that, but us being terrified of becoming our heroes, leading to a realization that we've already become our heroes, leading to a realization that if I could right now make a choice, I could right now make a choice to say, I love AI art and I love AI writing, and I'm going to grasp it with both hands. And I cannot bring myself to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So this whole, we're scared of becoming our heroes, and we've done such a good job of it for 20 years and patting ourselves on the back. And here I am that with the chalice being handed to me. Here's your chance to not be your hero. Take a big swig of AI art, and I don't want it.
Yeah. Well, because this is a fundamental difference. You taking a big swig out of the chalice of AI art means you giving up 40 to 60% of your creative process, you know?
Yeah. And my identity.
Yeah, your identity. And so that feels very different to me than, oh, I have to change my business model. But maybe we're following into the same trap of like, I'm unwilling to change. In this case, it's I'm unwilling to change my art process. I mean, okay, listen, I'm going to be honest about this. If AI can present me with a bunch of different layout possibilities for a page, I might use that. I might say, okay, thanks AI for these 40 options. I immediately can, because of my discerning artist eye, I can immediately discount 30 of them, right? So now I've got 10 left. 5 of those don't fit the aesthetic that I want to do. So now I've got 5 left. And then really only 2 or 3 capture the mood that I want to present in this page. So now I'll select from these 3, and then I'm still using my editorial eye to select from what AI presents me, right? Mm-hmm. But I get it that what you're saying is, yeah, but you've been removed from that process, and it's gutting. It's gutting to be removed from that process. Like that whole chunk of creativity is now like, Windows 95 can now do that. Great, thanks. Wonderful. I appreciate this world. Yeah.
Yeah. I just it takes a lot of the joy out too, and it also takes the soul out. And everything that you're saying about AI art, I can kind of almost get myself to go along with. Then you bring in AI writing, and I just throw my hands up. That part terrifies me.
Why? Okay, well, I know we're running late on the first half of the show, but let's continue this for 1 second. Why does that terrify you? Is it? I think that has more to do with the presence of human-seeming AI in the world than you're willing to admit. Don't you think?
Well, no, not only that, but it again, it comes down to that John Henry analogy. It becomes now, as a comics artist, we are our competition, if you will, is an AI that can spit out a comic every hour.
Yeah, if not more. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Whereas it takes us time. Like I'm going into a writing session right now. This week was supposed to be writing, and I've gotten precious little done. Right now, I'm supposed to be, this is going to be writing this week and next week. It takes me a long time to write if I want to write something good. Conceivably, we're going to be up against our competitor who can put one of these things out every hour, and can dominate social media. And how do you keep up with that? You almost now become like the equivalent of that artisanal soap maker. They're not going to be on the same level as Palmolive, Colgate, but they've got their soap that you can only find their soap with the little branches and twigs inside of it. Yeah, we become that.
I mean, if an audience's desire for art is a raging fire, you and I will be coming at it with a squirt gun, and AI will be coming at it with a fire hose of content. Right. And I see what you mean, because it's also that art. God damn it, the artisanal soap maker got me. That broke me for some reason. Fuck, that is what we're going to become. We're going to become artisanal soap makers.
Yeah. And our whole sales pitch is quite possibly going to become, and by the way, this is not,
do you like artisanal soaps? That's our marketing pitch.
It's going to be the same thing. But no. I mean, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to be emphasizing the fact that it's made by a human. It's still made by human hands.
Yeah.
Everything that you see in artisanal marketing is going to be us.
And this is why it's not going to work. Marketing works, sales work because of how they make you feel, not because of features. And if you're trying to sell art based on made by a human, people are going to be like, I don't give a shit. Who cares? AI art made me laugh more. That AI art was more entertaining. That was a better version of an Avengers movie by AI, that kind of thing.
It's the same reason we tell people not to say, hey, read my comic. It updates Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, nobody in the history of comics has ever gone out in the world saying, I really hope today I find a comic that updates Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's the wrong marketing pitch, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, I know you've got a note. We're going to talk, I think maybe next week. We've got a lot to say about marketing and the emotions of marketing. And so come back. I think we're probably planning on doing that next week. We've got so much to talk about in that regard.
Because right now, AI is stumbling and it's halting and it's self-revealing. Like you look at AI-produced art, you look at AI-produced writing for the most part, and you go, "Oh, that's clearly done by AI." I can see how it's basically a what do they call it when things are mashed together? There's that art form that's of things mashed together,
like a mashup.
They use it in video games a lot to do kind of animatics. Anyway, you can very clearly tell that it's a mashup of 4 different styles, and you see what the AI did, and you're like, "All right, I see you, AI." But remember, we're just at the first iteration of this happening. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we're on version 9.8, it's going to be amazing, and you're not going to be able to tell. And as soon as you can't be able to tell, that's when we're kind of done for, because then it's just a volume issue. Then you just run the processors longer and it's producing more work, and Brad's right. We're not going to be able to keep up with that. Oh, shit, Brad. Well, back to secretarial work for me, I guess.
Yeah.
At that point, we have to hope that universal basic income is instituted because we're all going to be out of work.
Yeah, no kidding. There's going to be a lot of us in trouble. Well, listen,
I think this has been. I'm surprised we ended up on this topic because we didn't plan it, but I think there's enough here where we jump back in on this topic 6 months from now or so, because it's worth keeping an eye on how this is going to advance. You're right. I did not go into this morning feeling terrible about my future, but now I have this existential dread, and I thank you for it, Brad.
And it's existential indeed.
Yeah, it is. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. Well, Brad, on that note of fiddling while Rome burns and we're all slowly replaced by AI and all becomes ash and woe. So let's move on to another question coming in from patreon.com/ComicLab. This comes in from Ryan and says, I've been wondering if our awesome art uncles, Brad and Dave, were starting out today. Is there a lead platform that you would use to guide all of your storytelling choices now and then cut or reformat to the rest of the platforms? And then Ryan goes on, as an animator that's had to create work that will eventually live in both broadcast and film formats, I'm used to thinking about things like center cut and pillar boxing. So I'm wondering if there's a similar best practice for webcomic artists. So Brad, just for the folks that might not be aware, can you describe what Ryan is describing there in terms of having a cut that's kind of could work for different formatted screens? What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, he might be talking about like making your background bigger so that it can be cropped different ways, or keeping your word balloons separate so that they can be slid around or reformatted or replaced or disappeared entirely.
Right.
So in other words, he's talking about keeping a certain amount of flexibility in your image so that you can make it work over a number of different platforms.
Yeah, and so for people that are familiar with TV, what that means is there's like if you're filming in IMAX, it's this beautiful, big, gigantic format, right? But you also, if you're doing IMAX right, you're anticipating that at some point in its life, it's going to have to be cut down to 1920 by 1080 or some version of that if it's 4K. And so that ratio, you're shooting big and wide. But like Batman was also shot so that if you had to crop it in, you still get the core action of Batman on the motorcycle in the tunnel, as he ejects from his Batmobile, right? Yeah. And so it's shot for IMAX, but it's also ready to go to be cropped down. And that's kind of what Ryan's asking for here is, Brad, you could create for webtoons, you could create for a graphic novel, you could create for a vertical scroll in general, you could create for a horizontal orientation. Which one would you lead off with, Brad? Yes. And then modify everything else around that?
The question is there a dominant platform? And the answer is unequivocally, as of today, unequivocally, there is a dominant, unequivocally. It's unquestionably.
One of my favorite things, because I do it too when my kids call me on it, when you say a word 2 or 3 times and then you're like, wait, is that not how? I'm just going to Elmer Fudd this and switch up the words. That's what I'm going to do.
It's the Porky Pig approach.
Yeah, exactly.
There is unquestionably a dominant platform, at least at this point in time, and it is the book. The book is the dominant platform. And I'll tell you why I say that. The book is where the money is.
Yes.
Unquestionably. The book is where the Kickstarter is. The book is where a lot of the Patreon goals are in terms of, again, you never give Kickstarter rewards to Patreon backers, but getting them a reward of getting an early access to the Kickstarter backer is a significant thing. The book is the most important thing. That's where a lot of the money is being made. So that's got to be dominant. That's got to be everything that you've got to do has got to have the book as the number one thing. Now, before you start shouting vertical scroll at me, keep in mind that dominant platform has to live in balance with the other platforms, right? So the book has got to be dominant, but it's got to be able to be sliced down into a vertical scroll. Okay. And it's got to be able to be updated online in significant updates. Again, I think we make a really big mistake when we just knee-jerk response put a page of our graphic novel onto the web. Unless you're really, really planning that page to be a significant update. Thinking in terms of pages instead of thinking in terms of updates, I think is a mistake, right? Yeah. You've got to make sure that update is significant. So sometimes that means you might post a half of a page. Sometimes a significant update is 2 pages, right? So just knee jerking it out and getting that page up there, I think you're not putting enough thought into it. Now, everything that Ryan talks about in terms of like maybe making bigger backgrounds or keeping your word balloons separate so that they can be composed, like especially something like that would be very, very useful in a vertical scroll webtoon style, because very often you see that the word balloons float above and below the panels. So that would be very, very useful to do. My advice to you is to do that sort of stuff, remembering that your book is the dominant platform, but do that sort of stuff to the extent that you can easily fit it into your overall workflow. I think there's a little bit of a danger going too far the other way, where you're putting all of this effort into making this thing that can be almost infinitely recropped and repositioned and do this and do that. And you're running out of time to actually do the work, or you're putting so much time into this nuts and bolts stuff that you're not putting enough time into the writing or the making good comics part. So my answer to this is the book is number one. It's the boss. And to do those other things to the extent that you can easily fit them into your process. Dave, what do you think?
I think you're right. And I think it's worth admitting right up front that this is harder than when we were coming up, where we were all just working for the page or just working for the comic strip or working for the graphic novel. You knew what the outlet was. You knew what the medium was. You knew what you had to get better at doing. And now you're like, okay, Brad, I hear you. I'm making the book, but I guess I'm also juggling these 7 balls off to the side, so it also works on Webtoons. I just want to admit, for all of us, it is harder. But once you establish some basic ground rules in your structuring, I think it's actually somewhat manageable. And Brad was talking about this as well, is that once you realize that long horizontal panels aren't ideal for a vertical scroll, you can do one of two things. You can move away from a horizontal panel. I've done that largely with Drive. I used to use those a lot more. Or you can mentally slice up your long horizontal panel such that when it comes time to bring it into Webtoons, you have 2 or 3 chunks that you can remove or sort of excise from that large panel so that they stand alone. Or you can do the thing, and I use this very frequently too, where you take a long horizontal panel and you introduce artificial slices in the panel. So now it's a 3-panel comic, but with art flowing across all 3 panels. Same final feeling for the presentation on the page in a graphic novel or in a book, but now you've just introduced a tiny little element of time slices, and so it could still work vertically, right? Other things you can do to just make your life easier. Brad and I have talked about this before. Avoid diagonal or slicing panel breaks. Try to keep them pretty squarish, rectangulish. The trickier the sort of rule of thumb is, the trickier that the artistry is on the panel break, the tougher it is it's going to be to present that well in a vertical scroll. Yeah, and
the word you're looking for is gutter.
God, geez Louise, my brain could not.
I saw you struggling with that. The word, like diagonal gutters.
That's like you trying to say unequivocally. That was great. It was just...
we're both a little bit looped from that first half.
Hey, gang, tune in next week when the AI hosts are here and they're, hello, I am David. I am Brad. We are here to host the show.
Dave, that's our takeaway. That's one thing they can't do that we can, is they can't make fools of ourselves here on the podcast. You can't get some AI to do that.
I got to tell you, Brad, if you fed an AI enough data points from my life, I think they could replicate what an asshat I can be sometimes. I think they could. I think they can replicate that.
I think it only takes a person like you to be that big of an asshat.
I think you own that. You know how to get me in the heart. That's great. Thank you.
But no, I think that is. I think that is for me at least. That's the answer. Is the dominant platform. And I caution you against getting too involved in making this thing ultra reworkable. Because again, those things are only going to have a small return on investment for the amount of time that you're going to put into it.
Right.
So keep yourself on a little bit of a leash there. I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'll tell you why I say that. For years, and I'm telling years, maybe 10 years, I was convinced that I was giving myself a big advantage with my comic. And I bet you know where I'm going to go with this. I would take my comic strip and I would take it apart, and then I would reconfigure it into a graphic novel when I was getting ready to do the books.
Right.
So instead of it being a comic strip collection, I would take all those panels, and some of them I would enlarge, some of them I would shrink. I'd put them here, and I would emulate a graphic novel page layout for my books.
Right.
I was convinced that this was a better presentation. It took me 3 times as long to lay out a book, because let's face it, laying out a book of comic strips, your first step is just going into image catalog script in InDesign and going, here's the strips, put them on the page. I guess in that regard, I was using AI long before it was popular.
Well, and I will say this, as someone who owns and loves those books,
Yeah.
Even with the best of intention, because he was coming from comic strip to graphic novel, sometimes it landed on the wrong emphasis. You know, you'd have it would you would mid-page, you'd have a big hit, then you'd be like, well, that's weird. Then the page kind of ends on a weird denouement, and then the next page would, it just didn't flow quite right, if you know what I mean. And I don't say that in a hurtful way, because you've since found a much better way of doing it, I think.
Oh yeah, but I was convinced, and it took a lot of work, and I was sold on it. You couldn't tell me otherwise. Believe me, people have tried. I remember Scott saying, "Is this worth the amount of work you're putting into it?" And this is Scott Kurtz, and somebody whose opinion I really respect, and he just flat out said one time, "Is this worth the amount of work you're putting into it?" I was convinced it was. The truth was I was getting a very low return on investment in terms of that time. And so when I see something like this, when you're talking about making extra big backgrounds, and you're talking about, keep the word balloons on a separate layer, I could kind of understand. I don't know that would fit into my process, because I leave Clip Studio and go into Photoshop for the coloring. And at that point, a lot of that stuff gets flattened down. I don't know that I'm trying to think if there's a way that I could fit that in. I don't know what it is, but I know that my process is not like a universal process. Right. So I'm throwing that out there. If that works for you to be able to put those word balloons on separately on a separate layer and keep them in a place where they can be moved around when you do the vertical scroll, that sounds like it would be a very good idea. It means that a little bit of extra work in that, like right now, you're not drawing the background that the word balloons cover up. You're not coloring the background that the word balloons cover up. And if you're going to go to something like that, you got to understand that it's going to mean a certain amount of extra work for you to do, just on a pragmatic basis. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that if you wanted to, you could do it a little bit. I just don't want you to get so caught up in it like I was, that I did that for 9 books, 8 or not. Yeah, 9 books. That's 9 years easily, a book a year. And I couldn't see the forest for the trees. So I guess my caution comes from that life experience that I lived. Be a little bit careful that you're actually getting good ROI.
So let's assume now that you're designing for the book first. And I want to talk about the changing world ahead of us in the next 5, 10, 15 years. I still think, regardless of what digital formats or presentational technologies come along, that the book is kind of going to be a universal for at least another couple hundred years. And I'll tell you why. It helps a brain process information when it can be broken down into individuated pages. In the same way that acts are helpful, chapters are helpful, pages will kind of still be helpful 100 years from now, even if all of our data has gone to a complete vertical scroll, right? Where I do think now actually vertical scroll is with us to stay for a good long while, until a presentational technology comes along that either keeps your eye in stasis and the objects fade in and fade out at the same location. We've talked about that before. Or until some weird technology comes along that would require a horizontal scroll. And I can't imagine one that would require, or that would make everyone wholesale across the planet change from vertical to horizontal. I don't see it yet. It might exist. Maybe the human eye in holographic form does better horizontally. I don't know. Nobody knows that yet. What I'm getting at is, I think we're stuck with the book, and I think we're stuck with vertical scroll at this point. And so I think, to Brad's point, designing for the book, but very much keeping in mind vertical scroll as you design the book, is probably the way to go. And I think we're stuck with those two formats for at least the very, very foreseeable future.
Absolutely. So, Dave, as long as we're in the question answering mood, let's go on to this one that I really like a lot. It comes in from Michael Lynn Jones, who says, "Hey, Brad and Dave, just wondering how much of your own life experiences are reflected in your comics. You guys rock." Thank you for that, Michael. Dave, how much of your life experience goes into your comic? Speaking of a very philosophical day, that's a very philosophical question.
That is. And let me answer it very philosophically, actually. This is probably more deep than you want to get. I would think that my comics are 100% me. Yeah. But my comics only represent 1% of me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense to me. Keep talking.
Like, everything that's in the comics is me. some way, shape, or form. It's either me Mary Sueing it at the worst, or me writing the antithesis of me, such that I can prove a point that I would rather people get to by seeing the negative of it. You know what I mean? So a character arc that does all the wrong things is still me, even though I would not do those things, because it's ultimately proving the point of what I would like the reader to arrive to. You know, and so I think all of the comics are me, and yet all of the comics taken together, encompassed in one big thing, still only represents 1% of who I am.
Right.
How about you, Brad?
Same answer. I feel exactly the same way. Everything that you read there is me, but it's so distilled, so distorted, so embellished, so evolved that if you were to try to sift through it and find me, I don't think you'd be able to. Right. And that's where especially young writers get into a little bit of a trap, because one of the most popular pieces of writing advice is write what you know. Yeah. Right. So a lot of people are like, okay, I'll write what I know. Here's my mom and my dad, my brother and my husband and my wife. And they write what they know. But I think there's more to that advice than write what you know. Right. In other words, it's not write what you know the way a journalist would write it, right? With it getting 2 confirmations for every fact and so on and so forth. What that means is to let that become an inspiration, and then to take that and make it into something that's really entertaining and interesting. That's where we get into that conversation about autobio comics and why I think so often there's a danger in using your life to do a comic. In that, besides all of those problems that we've seen come up before, where somebody, who the comic is based on says, well, I don't act like that, or I never did that. And then you end up losing a friendship over it. But it's also, you get into these really weird traps if you base a comic on your life, where you end up doing an awful lot of stuff that is kind of, you had to be there material. Right. It's very significant to you because you know the context and all the background of all of that stuff. But to try to present that to a different person, it's kind of like, you had to be there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think taking that write what you know advice too literally can be a problem. And if I would say I've got the same answer that Dave has. Everything that I write is 100% based on me. But listen, you see some stuff going on in After Dark that darn well that's an embellishment. So it's something that has to be that is you plus creativity, you plus data, you plus life experience. You know what I'm saying? Exactly. Yes, absolutely. So if you were able to actually find my life experience in my writing, I would say that maybe that meant that I didn't do a very good job of writing.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that caught me off guard. How good that was. Yes. Yeah. Because in our writing, like Bob Dylan said, we contain multitudes, and the whole point is that this is Dave Kellett imagining what this character would do, would say, would react, and it's not me, and yet the character is flowing from me, So it is me if I was an alien who grew up with fears of XYZ and now is on an adventure, and that's not me, that's not who I am, and yet I'm projecting a sliver of my personality into an other that I'm now bringing to life and breathing life into. And so even though you can't read from that character who Dave Kellett is, that character is entirely Dave Kellett. And so it's fed with my reactions, with my life experiences, with my data points as I've come along through life. And I feed with discretion and with editorial eye, I feed that into the character's life and opinions and moods. And so it is a slice of me, even though it is not all of me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dave, what do you think? Do you want to take one more question for the show today?
Let's do it, my friend. Let's do it.
Yeah, I've got one. This is a little bit self-serving because it came in and it specifically talks about not safe for work comics. But I want to handle it really quickly here, and it is this. how do you stay fresh with After Dark? As you've said, after a while, it's body part A into body part B. I doubt you're getting massive inspiration from other things that are out there. Do you read a lot of hentai? Would your web browsing get you arrested in 5 different countries? Or are you looking at mating rituals for Amazonian dart frogs? And Dave has just broken into a sweat. So the question is, for Not Safe for Work Comics, how do you keep the sex fresh? And I chose this as our closing one. Number one, because God, we need a little bit of happiness in our lives, and making Dave uncomfortable makes me happy.
Oh, sure.
But also because it's super important, and because it gets to the heart of what makes Not Safe for Work Comics really great, in my opinion. And it's this. It's not about the body parts at all. It's not about although that's what the focus becomes on a macro level. It's not about the body parts. It's not about any of this stuff. What it is what's bringing those people into the room.
Yeah.
Right. Why are they having sex becomes where the real heat is, where the real, if you forgive me, kink is. Okay. That's where the hot is that's the spice. Why are they doing that? It's not about, body part A or body part B. It's about the situation. And as soon as I figured that out, I think my work took a big step forward. When I realized that for myself, that the hottest thing about a sex scene wasn't necessarily the obvious body parts. It's the way a hand touched a face.
Right.
And when I got that just right, all of a sudden the scene just came alive. Right.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of communication, that physical communication, and also what I saw time and time again, my audience responding to was when a storyline started in Evil Inc., the public-facing Evil Inc., and then continued in After Dark. It became a really great scene because they'd been following these characters for maybe several pages of storyline. Now, all of a sudden, they take a step over into the After Dark storyline, and it became very significant why they were engaged in that. So I think my answer, and there's probably other answers to this question, but my answer to your question, how do you keep the sex fresh? It's all about the emotion.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I'm so glad that this question asker has asked this question of me, especially because if there's one person in this world who can advise on how to keep the sex, I'm here for you. I'm ready to talk the topic. Let's do this. Let's unroll this.
Yeah.
So, no, I actually do have a helpful thought about this. Is viewing it from 30,000 feet, right? About what this is coming from someone who has never drawn and never will draw a sex scene, but if you look at it from a 30,000 feet level, you're basically drawing IKEA instructions. If you look at it from a purely physical level, it's like take part 32B, put it into part 32C, then rotate and add in a different screw, that kind of
rotating?
Thing. Yes. I'm being 100% serious. Listen, I've done some stretching.
I'll never look at my Allen wrench the same.
Let me tell you, yoga is amazing. No, but if you look at it from a super bird's eye view, it's IKEA instructions. Brad is right. It's only the emotions of the human existence that make it really intriguing. Because otherwise, it literally is slot A into slot B, and what are the all the different ways that bookshelf can be put together. Right. It seems to me like yes, you're 100% right that only the emotions, only how they got there. It's why, if for those of you that have seen Severance, why that one tiny little hand touch has invested with so much meaning because the characters have been building up to that forever. So a hand touch means nothing in the average human day. You transact business and you go to get change from the cashier, you're touching their hand. It means absolutely nothing. It's only because of the emotion that it has any meaning. Am I right, Brad? You have to have that buildup of emotion. That's what makes it different. That's what makes it unique. That's what makes it interesting.
No, actually, you just hit the nail right on the head, or the screw right on the
slot 32A to 32B. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
you did that's exactly it. And I think the quicker, if you really want to succeed at Not Safe for Work Comics, other than the fact that obviously I think your drawing skills have to be on point. I think focusing on the emotion really is your best bet. And again, focusing on why those people are engaged in that act really is where you find the heat. And listen, I'll just say it. The reason that these two people right here, Brad and Dave, are engaged in this act is that we love doing ComicLab, and it's time to bring this show to an end because I get to say you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
I got to tell you, we've also found out today why the little cartoon IKEA guy is always smiling. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Guigar, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
It probably also speaks to why I feel so uncomfortable at the end of an IKEA build when I have parts left over. I'm like, well, oh boy, this speaks to whole things in my life that I'm doing wrong. The ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice, and do join us there, patreon.com/ComicLab. Flat pack. What do we got there? Flat pack, wood screws,
press board,
press board, cheap wood, cheap wood.
Cheap wood. Holy Christ.